Computer. Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Dan Winter, as you know, fractalfield.com, fractalu.com, and I'm so pleased that we're back. She's a very busy person, Bridget Nielsen, who's a star. Thank you for coming, Bridget.
Thank you so much for having me again, Dan. I love our conversations.
And Bridget has an amazing audience, and she teaches a lot about healing and ancestors and cool stuff. Uh, and Bridget just moved from toward Texas land, and she's on new adventures and even more powerful, and it's so cool.
Yeah, things are changing.
So what Bridget and I have been talking about in the past led to, because I was so fascinated about Bridget's, not only was she very involved in the Mormons because of her family, but she had a very strong ancestral connection to the Jute. Is it Ute?
Ute, yeah.
Yeah, that which were in that area of Utah, right? That's how Utah got its name, I suppose.
Yeah.
And a grandmother. So, shamanic, indigenous, maybe a little bit witchy, I mean, shamanic grandmothers,
Yeah.
and the Mormon connection. And that led us to a conversation about that ancestor memory had some real slip knots in it.
Yes. Yeah, we had those conversations, and now this is a continuation.
Yes. And so we wanted to talk about, in general, the healing of ancestral memory. And obviously, Bridget has very specific information about the fact that within her own family, the Mormons, there's a lot of colorful parts of the Mormon history. Oh my God, we're not going to. Bridget has that experience, and if she wishes to share. But the Mormons, in part, Bridget mentioned, actually did not admit, but probably were responsible in part for some genocide of her other ancestral family, the Jutes, right? With,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, and Bridget has personal memories of that kind of thing, or personal in the family kind of memories. And so that's an example of something huge that needs healing, obviously. And,
Yes.
and the idea is we could learn a lesson from this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then Dan's going to share into the science of it, because which you can do all the intuitive stuff as well. Like that's what's so cool about you is because you know the science, but you're so intuitively connected to all of this as well.
Well, it's good, but see, this is part of the drama here, because if sometimes if you can teach it, do it, or no, if you can't do it, teach it. How's that go? But the theory I'm pretty good at, but I think I actually figured out why I'm not what you would call clairvoyant, for example, not very much, a little clairaudient, because my brain waves, I have this beautiful cascade, but it doesn't do the gamma, and which is the high frequency, and we realized that that's part of what enables remote viewing or clairvoyance. Uh, I'd really be great to do some measurement of your brainwaves someday, Bridget.
Okay. I think the last time we did heart coherence, and at that time you were like, I think you need to hug more puppies and babies. And I was like, oh, and I've taken that homework and I have done that. So I think I'm healed on the heart range, but it would be really great to look at the brain waves.
But I suspect that, Bridget, you in fact are a bit clairvoyant, would you say?
Yes, I would say that I am. And I remember actually the moment when that turned on.
Aha.
Uh,
Were you quite young, or?
No, it turned on. I mean, I have like clairsentience and like I've had other clairs turned on since I was a kid, but the clairvoyance didn't turn on until my mid-20s. And it was at this poignant moment in Sedona, like at like a crazy energetic like convergence line on this moment, and it just opened, and I just remember it opening. Because before I couldn't see clairvoyantly. I could like translate images through drawing and through art, but I couldn't see in
Uh-huh.
that way. And it turned on from that experience.
Was that, would you describe that as emotional pressure, magnetic pressure, energy line pressure, or the trigger?
All of the above. It was
Yeah.
it was hyper emotional. It was pretty much a full contact experience
Uh,
with my star family, and so it was like yeah, emotional, energetic, like DMT rush, like that. But it didn't turn on right then. I like went to sleep, and then like that next morning, like it
aha.
came about.
Yes. And star family, am I allowed to be curious and ask, well,
Sure.
like which star family?
At that moment, it was this like cascade of everything at once. So I couldn't even like it was just like all of it. Like I kind of went on like a little roundabout through the galaxy. And I think I'm not sure exactly who at that time it was. Like my memory around it's a little bit foggy at this point, but I would assume that it was probably connected to some like Pleiadian energy and other connections, but it was like kind of beyond the specifics of who. It was like tapping into the universal like isness
Mm.
aspect.
Was it like someone was helping you to be, would you call that an initiation?
Yes. Yeah. And I had no expectations. I had already done like dozens of meditations on the vortexes in Sedona. And so I just like sat down like any normal day and was like, okay, I'm just going to be present. And then it just hit me. And no one
Uh-huh.
else had the experience. It was like, I was like bawling, hysterical. Like I felt all this energy running through my body. Like I could feel my like the ET energy like through my hands, through my body, like these other energies that are me, through me, like all
Oh,
this stuff at once.
oh, nice.
Um and everyone else was just quiet after the meditation. I'm just over there in my own weird experience.
I felt that
So,
my hair stood up just now as I got it, man. I felt something that was powerful. How cool. And
yeah.
that leads us to one things that I wanted to talk about here when you said you felt like the isness. Uh,
Mm.
because somehow as I was meditating on what we were going to do today, I realized, well, look, from the Aboriginal and probably from a lot of the Indigenous American perspective, uh, ancestor memory and divine presence, they're the same thing.
Yes.
It's like from an Aboriginal perspective, if you haven't talked to your ancestor today, you haven't had a day, basically. Like your whole life is about talking to your ancestor memory. So even when the American Indigenous, they talked about Great Spirit was ancestor memory. Well, why?
Mm.
So, in a sense, when we ask the question, what is the physics that allows us to have these communications? The question is, what is the physics of God? Is the same question.
Mm.
And of course, having spent half my life on the question of what is the physics of God, any excuse to talk about that.
Yeah, so what's the physics of God there, Dan? Just a
there,
small question.
there's a detail, ain't it? Uh,
Yeah.
well, see, the turning point in my thinking about this is actually fairly recent. So remember, we had all these. In fact, I'm going to show a little picture here.
Yeah.
Just this is just like a 10-minute gig on quote unquote the physics of God. So what we believe is when the indigenous people said a specific magnetic line, dream line song track was your ancestors' memory. So when Auntie Lorraine died in Mullumbimby, the magnetic line that had a storm across the continent at the time of her death was her family's pet magnetic line, which they have been singing to for like 100,000 generations.
Mm.
So that particular magnetic line had become self-aware and was a family pet. So
Hmm.
it's more like for the Hopi, that particular strain of corn, which would only germinate if you sang the right song to that corn, which was the DNA of that corn was their family pet. So how did that DNA become a family pet? Or how did that magnetic line across a continent become a family pet? We now know what that magnetic line is. It's called longitudinal interferometry. It's a coherence into a grid, the longitudinal nodes, obviously. So this is a picture of how we think magnetic lines become self-aware. Physics of
Hmm.
God,
Hmm.
non-destructive turning inside out, recursive implosion, lots of names for that. But what happens is if it turns inside out enough times, sort of like this, the implosion at the core becomes multiply connected, and we would say impedance matches to the longitudinal array. So at the turning inside out point, John Dee called it scintillation. John Dee would actively use the scintillation point where the light turned inside out, just like a pinhole camera. And he used that spark at the scintillation point to make phone calls to ancestors, specifically at the spark gap point. And we know that attention causes compression, and that's what enables. But this is what I wanted to talk about. So, as I said, the turning point in my little scratching my head about the physics of God came fairly recently when we've been teaching these kids to see without their eyes.
Mhm.
And it's very clear that the moment they begin to see without their eyes, they develop a very specific frequency signature in their brain waves. And here it is. This is the alpha in green, and the blue harmonics here are golden ratio times the alpha, and the pink harmonics are octave multiples of that alpha. So they're literally making the the cube in the dodeca nest in their head. And that implosion, the moment they develop this, and gamma, by the way, is important way up here. Suddenly they're blindfolded and they say, oh, the little vortex inside my head became an eyeball and I can look through the tube, even though I'm blindfolded. And they all say the same thing. So we got excited about that. And then we found out that the same frequency signature, but much higher amplitude, was the moment when Jean-Charles Moyen repeatedly could turn his lucid dreams into bilocation. So, and this is the same frequency signature that we're feeding to all of our fancy gizmos, Therify.net and all that stuff, which is octave cascade, golden ratio cascade, completed implosion. And we know that triggers lucid dreaming. Okay, and there's examples. So the turning point recently, I had a bit of a eureka here. So the guy that's teaching kids to do exactly this in New Zealand, he's wonderful. He's our partner, Iris, in Amsterdam. And you'll see all these films on this on our YouTube channel, Dan Winter Fractal Field. But he says, oh, yeah, and by the way, in the East, regularly, it's common, it's normal that just after kids learn how to do just that, they get this trance, they get this bliss, they also begin to see their ancestors. Mm. And he said, the people in the West, they're afraid of that. That scares the hell out of them. But in the East, it's considered normal. Of course, you're seeing your ancestors. But why, just at that moment, when the vortex inside your head gets squeezing correctly to implode and create that eyeball, which is literally the vortex turn inside out point, becoming what I call phase conjugate, which couples or impedance matches to the longitudinal array. So the longitudinal array, the bigger array outside your head, you get the small array, your synapses, and then you get the big. You can graduate from the little array inside your head, the synapses, to a bigger array outside your head called the longitudinal nodes or scalar, when and if you get that implosion going, which I would say might be a way to talk about your experience that day. You're talking about that, that initiation you had. You got still, you were on a magnetic line, you felt the emotions converge. Suddenly there was enough pressure.
Yeah.
Enough convergence. And suddenly the wormhole opened. Oh, hello. What is an eyeball? What is impedance matching to the longitudinal array? What is the beginning of clairvoyance? Well, why is that the physics of God? See, advanced cultures like the Andromedans, I'm good friends with some of them, I think, they don't really talk about God very much. They're sort of with the Aboriginals. They talk about the Great Spirit, or you might call it divine intelligence. Some people talk about the supreme intelligence, which I think is a useful language. What happens is that array becomes informed and potentially loving. So you could talk about the physics that we've been calling the Great Spirit in very specific terms about the negentropy and self-awareness of that array, the longitudinal array, which serves survival. You only get in there if you can do compression well, ancestral memory, collective unconscious, communion of saints. Successful death is clearly a black hole of implosion. That's how you impedance match and touch that array the moment you could have some clairvoyance. So the physics of God is a very specific thing, which then is going to inform you what you call God pretty much doesn't exist very much in a metal building full of electrosmog. What you've been calling God, sorry, right. It ain't there.
Right.
The place to die well, the place, and Bridget was just saying, so you moved to your new place and you found some magnetic lines. Is that right?
I did find magnetic lines on this new place that we're living, and the dreams have been outrageous. Like, just roll over and I'm like, did you have crazy dreams? And he's like, yeah, I had wild dreams. Like it's just like so I'm not quite lucid. Like that's one of my I'm not
Mhm.
lucid all the time, but I have like vivid dreams and my partner's been having crazy vivid dreams too on and before we were just having those and then I, did what Dan recommends, go find the magnetic lines. So I was like walking around the property with all the like Christian Texans probably being like, "Oh gosh, which, moved down the road." But I'm like finding them and there is one that runs through the bed, like through
Oh,
the
there
bedroom.
you go. That's it.
So
There's
so
one
I'm
that
like,
runs.
"Okay, it makes sense."
This is, by the way, where I'm sitting right now, the magnetic line to Mount Canigou. I know exactly where that line is. And when I close my eyes, I can use it as a periscope, man. I'm not highly, but now just backing up a second, you implied the difference between a vivid dream and a lucid dream. Do you want to say a little more about that?
I mean, I'm very much a student of the dreaming, which I want to add in one more component before I answer that question. Because as you're talking about the eye or the wormhole,
Mhm.
I studied with the Toltec tradition, which their tradition is highly. I mean, lucid dreaming is their thing.
Yeah.
That's like their goal, actually. And one of the practices that was kind of hidden that we learned, which is now public, is how to find that hole. I mean, and it's kind of like a black dot, like it's like a
Mhm.
circle that appears. It's like the
Yeah.
way that they talk about it, and you get into the state, you get into the
Yeah.
brainwave state, and then you can see that dot, see that hole, and then in that moment, what you do is you program it or you intend. It's actually you're intending, and you're like, see me dreaming this way or see me living this way, and it's like this point of like maximum potential for creating whatever you
Yeah.
want, creating it when you do end up dreaming or creating in your life. And so I just wanted to bring that, like,
Yeah, no, that's right. And when the kids
touch.
talk about, the first time that inner tube opens up, seeing without their eyes, it's often not in the middle, actually. It's like, they have to hear this and then they have to push on one. They have to balance the pressures until the tornado comes to a point. And
Oh,
that's where
interesting.
get the eyeball. It's literally the eye of the tornado. It's a plasma vortex that
Yeah.
conjugates at the center, and that implosion impedance matches to that array, and that's the opening of the eyeball, the tunnel.
And for adults, like in those moments when we were in that lesson, we were like sitting very still, and the teacher has this like really powerful energy to where we could all kind of go into trance really quickly,
Oh, nice.
and it would like appear quite quickly.
Mhm.
And then it was something that needed to be cultivated. So at that time, it was kind of hard for me to access it. And then over time, now when I'm when I'm falling asleep or when I'm really relaxed and I close my eyes, I can see it pretty constantly.
Ah,
Um,
you can
but
see
I'm
the
just
little black hole, that little
yeah, yeah. But
the
I'm
dot.
wondering like what for those listening, like what they can do, because like the kids have more access to it and like we all have access to it. What are some like practices or
Well,
ways that people could bring that in?
I mean, classically, when they first taught kids to see without their eyes, like one of the steps, one, you get relaxed, feel very safe, confident, the whole thing. And then there was one thing, it was called imagine yourself in beautiful nature. So even if you're
Mm.
not in beautiful nature, close your eyes and imagine you're in the most beautiful nature you ever were. And suddenly your aura says, oh, I need to turn inside out and implode because I'm going to suck in beautiful nature. And that's part of the process, that imagination, obviously. And as you say, set your intent. And of course, whatever you do to get into that alpha state, one practical example is the Mayer wave 0.1 hertz 10-second breath, 5-second in, 5-second out, which is the sacrocranial pump, which is on the cascade of harmonics to implosion, golden ratio to Planck. So there's breath exercises and there's the PowerPoint issue of Castaneda, all of these things that serve implosive compression.
Mm-hmm. Is there a hold on that breath? The five in, the five out? I'm
Well,
not sure.
normally you can
Or
do
is
it
it
many ways with or without a hold. The point is
okay?
that there would be a still point at
Yeah.
10-second intervals. And
Okay.
however to do that most comfortably. Most people say 5 seconds in, very gradual, 5 seconds out, for example. But
Okay.
that 0.1 hertz, 10-second called Mayer wave is not just the definition of LF, component heart rate variability. It is the definition of the most important natural resonance frequency of the blood and the most important harmonic of the infrasound of the spine liquid pump, physics of Kundalini. It's all of that. It's the only thing heart math calls coherence. They didn't get it all right, but if you combine that with harmonic inclusiveness, and that was the last film we made on heart coherence. But hey, I wanted to go back just. I think you said the Toltec.
Yes.
Recently, part of my intrigue here was I think the Olmec were like ancestors to Toltec, if I remember. And the Olmec were famous for a couple things. Not only were they willing to walk like 100 miles to get the right huge stones in order to call the ancestors. And later we learned that those stones were called phase conjugate dielectrics. In other words, ancestors could inhabit only the right kind of stones, and the Olmec knew. And the same thing applied. The Olmec were famous for calling ancestors into obsidian mirrors.
Oh, yeah. That was one of the main practices, was working with obsidian, for all of this, for the dreaming, for healing.
Yeah, and John Dee's, Black Mirror, which he apparently got from Aztec Toltec. And so what about that mirror? Hello? Could that, the moment that Nostradamus actually got his scrying to work was when he learned to put the right kind of coating on the bottom of his water scrying cup. Guess what that coating was? The right kind of mirror? Ooh, what's a phase conjugate mirror? What's obsidian? So the place where the dielectric is permissive, I'm just going to the place where the dielectric is permissive, for example, in phase conjugate optics, that's where the capacity of the charge waves can converge like pine cones and implode. And again, at that turning inside out point, there's the radio to ancestor memory. So this is great. So I think we've got a clue here now that if somebody said, do you know what the physics of God is? Then after you answer that question, you can say, do you know what the physics of making phone calls to ancestors is?
Yes.
It's
and
Go ahead.
And I like that you're expanding the call to ancestors, because for you and me, we know kind of like what that means in like a feeling sense. And I think a lot of people are still getting introduced to this concept. They're like, I don't know, some old people that died, like, why do I want to be in contact with them, and it's like, no, the ancestors are like isness. It is everything. It's like this stream, this river, like, of consciousness. So there's more there. There's so much more there. And I think that I like that inclusion of broadening.
And Carl Jung would have loved you saying that, the collective unconscious, the communion of saints, all the religions, they knew this was more than just a few old people's memory. No, this is the library of survival information that if you can't do that radio, man, as an Aboriginal, you ain't an Aboriginal. Right. You got to do that radio.
Right.
And so now we get the idea that in areas where that stream, and use a good term, that stream, which is literally the next dimension is a name for how many axes of spin are superposed in that stream. And so that when that stream becomes well-informed, then that library is like everything, man. It makes the internet look boring. If you can go to your PowerPoint, close your eyes and open that wormhole, man, you really don't need the internet. I'm sorry, guys. But in fact, and the physics of how it works is a scream, because literally, when you set up a Stargate on that array, you have to have the right IP. Signature exactly mated from the send point to the receive point in the Stargates. And is that IP number? Well, the internet is just an introduction to the real communicator here.
Yes.
So that's the fun part. Well, now that we've answered the question of the physics of God, at least we have an idea how a divine intelligence could exist. And then those local circulations then become interstellar circulations. John Dee's idea of the Ophanim Enochian, and Michael Sarian criticizing John Dee because you didn't know how to sort out the good guys from the bad guys. Well, very complicated question. And there's astral hygiene issues at every level here.
Yes.
Yeah. For example, if you had the right intent that just your ancestors get on the phone line now, then you don't have an astral hygiene problem. You get a circle of elders that are holding the gates.
Well, and that is one of the tricky things, and I do observe that for myself and then other people in these sacred sites or these ley lines where it's like you get everything. It's just this river of like a bunch of stuff, you know? Like
Yeah.
I'm taking a couple groups to Europe this summer, and like for instance, like Glastonbury, England, it's like a mix. Like it's like anything and everything you want to access, but it has that convergence of some of the most ley lines anywhere on the planet coming together. So there's like major access, but it's like that's part of it is like the discernment of how to do that.
Yeah.
And for me, at least, I'm saying a student of you in these practices, and I think that the piece of intention
Yeah.
is so powerful for that discernment.
Yeah, exactly. And the way we had expressed that was, in ancient times, the family circle is dancing to trance in a circle, but everyone in that circle is very clear. Only our ancestors are coming on this phone line, and
Right.
that solid intention is like a bubble. And
Yes.
if there is a focus, and also then the rhythm of the drumming, which relates to the breathing, it fits a Tibetan how to help people die well. It's also a drumming, it's a rhythm, it's an infrasound.
To key into that particular vibrational stream.
Right, right.
Okay, so I have something interesting that just like the dots connected. This is what happens with you, like these dots connect. So I was listening to this Irish podcast about the banshee, the banshee.
Oh, they were like the Minahuni. They were mischievous elementals, or
Yeah, and they were kind of like they're I think they're a part of the ancestral stream, and they're these like kind of like entities that come alive like that like wail and like grieve like when people die, or they come around right before someone's about to die and something like that. And I was
really.
listening to this podcast and I'm like, this is so intense and kind of spooky. Why am I listening? And one of the things that was so interesting, which ties into what you were saying of calling your ancestors specifically, as well as particular DNA that accesses certain streams, is that when the people would hear the banshee and like, or like at that time, maybe not present day Ireland, but like back when, everyone knew that this was a thing. Most people believed in it. They're like, this is what
Uh-huh.
happens right before someone's going to die or when someone does die. And they would hear the call of the banshee, and they would feel it coming across the land. Like it would be moving like
Like a
really fast.
like a sandworm.
Yeah, like a sand. Yeah, exactly. Like a
Boom.
sandworm moving across. And then they would hear it. And some of them would be like, oh, I don't need to worry. That's not my family's banshee. And mostly like the banshees were connected to those that were landowners
Oh,
and
really?
like had the land. And so it was one of those things where they could discern, like they could sense it going, say, through the ley lines or through the land. But then now I'm like putting together the pieces that actually, if it wasn't their genetics, like their families, they didn't need to worry that the banshee was coming for them. So
No.
that again, they're a part of this bigger stream and river, that's happening, keyed into it. But it's like, oh, I don't need to worry, that's someone else's family. And it was like connected to a different ancestral stream, but a lot is happening through the land. Have you heard of anything like that? I just was
Well,
putting together those pieces.
all I can think of is when I was growing up on Lake Erie, I really wanted to know what Erie meant. And that sounds very eerie, what you're saying. And
Yeah.
the word Irie, as in Ireland, actually means the root of the eye, as it were. And,
Oh.
and, and so the Irie land was the land of the seers in a way. And I have to
Yeah.
say, our friend Michael is the only person I actually knew who apparently was able to bring someone back from the dead, actually. And they would
Wow.
go in there, sort of like, Robin Williams in What Dreams May Come. How do you go in and find that spirit and make that connection among the banshees? Actually, I must say, my hair is standing up right now, so I don't think I want to talk about this too much more because
No, but it is an interesting. I liked bringing it forward for the piece of discernment when
yeah,
there's like a lot coming through, and it's like you get to discern what that is and means to you, and then also that there is this connection between the land, the lines,
yeah,
spirit, and particular families and
that's right.
particular genetic
Yeah,
streams.
yeah.
So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, it's like we just watched a film of this famous guy in South Spain. He doused the magnetic lines like 20 miles points on the land, like 20 miles apart, and made a map of the key points and went to each one and did a very coherence thing. They put a gold rod in and made a huge amount of rain. And he switched on these magnetic lines right across the continent. And our friend in Malcolm Borgward in Perth, when he did these rituals across Australia to heal the war between the men tribe and the women tribe of the Aboriginals, huge rainstorms followed him across the continent every time. So this is an introduction to the ideas. If there's a tangled mess on those magnetic lines of family memories, oops, I mean, it's even said this is the reason Australia is a desert. Hello? Because there was no permission to touch, because there was, and this we think was actually Aboriginal marriage law, is Alpha Draco, as is the caste system. And, to them, God was in a way the Greys, the Khmer. So anyway, this brings us to the need then to heal those magnetic lines, which is the process of peacemaking, which is the process of ancestral memory, which brings us to Bridget's story.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Well, just so that where we were in this story when we left off last time was that Bridget realized that, we had been talking about the fact that the Mormon history, unfortunately, had a lot of serious astral hygiene messes and even abuse. There's some messes there, and we don't need to, it's up to you if you want to talk about it. But the point was that she saw the connection to her own, because the other half of her family, she was raised Mormon, was ancestral Jute, and her grandmother and the family karma was part of the fact that actually the Mormons don't admit it, but they were in part largely responsible for genocide of that indigenous line. And what did it mean to heal that within your own family? That's where Bridget and I thought, oh, we need to do another conversation about that one.
Yes. And the great part is that this is a ongoing story, and these like story threads like come together because of our conversations. Like, so I'm like on this journey, and it's kind of like, okay, where are you at now on this journey? I'm like, well, this is the update. So this is the update as far as the past couple of months from that last conversation that we had. So so there's been this yearning, right, for this healing to take place, like, and for me particularly on that land up there in northern Utah, it's just absolutely incredible. The mountains, and like, it's just very, very sacred and special to me, and I've had like a lot of contact with the indigenous energies that are like run along those mountain lines and such. And I'm not there, right? I'm in Texas. And so it's like, okay, well, I'm not doing any work there right now. But there was an experience where I was watching this movie that is very ancestrally connected. I'll just say what it is, but it's like a Black Panther 2, like a Marvel movie.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. And for some reason, particularly that movie, just like, I mean, absolutely, it does the chills things, like for some, there's something embedded in it. And I'd be curious to know like if that's, I'm assuming it's possible to embed a certain like frequency stream into a creation, right? Into a movie. Would that be true?
Yeah. Is there like an animal icon associated with something here that?
Yeah, the panther, the Black Panther.
And what does that animal mean to
them?
Yeah.
It's I mean, that's their ancestors.
Oh, I
So
see.
it's like, yeah.
So for the Jute, the ancestor is Black Panther, is it?
Oh, no, it isn't. It's, I mean, I think it's bear. I think it's a bear that's the ancestor. But what was interesting is I'm watching this movie, and I do have like, I get powerful spiritual energy from that series, but nothing happened particularly when watching the movie. But then I went to sleep, and that ancestral stream, whether it's that African stream, that Wakandan stream, like came to me in the night, and it was like, DMT like experiences, like all this clairvoyance and visions and animals, like their stream wasn't my stream, but they were like showing me all these things. And then towards the end, they were like, they showed me my ancestral plane, like and they showed me the Ute, like ancestor that was my great grandfather, and they showed him alone. And then they showed, my dad and my brother, and it's the male line. and they were showing it was beautiful, like the ancestral space was really like vibrant and alive, but he was alone, and it was like the message was, you need to look into this, like like there's something wrong,
He's
like
stuck
in
alone. He's stuck
yeah,
alone. Yeah.
yeah.
And just to back up, when you said they were showing, who is they? If I'm
Well, I don't know, but it seems like it's connected to this, like the ancestors that were embedded into like that movie, like the creation of that movie. So I would say some level of like the African
yeah,
tribal soul.
when I think Panther, I think South America, major tribes there, Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl, all kinds of things. But yeah, I'm sure there's big tribal ancestral. So that animal totem spirit lineage was showing you, and you had a very specific sense of they, and that they
Yeah,
were showing you something very specific and intentional, which was, oops, your grandfather is a grandfather was
yeah,
stuck and alone. And what does
yeah,
that mean? Question
yeah,
mark.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it did feel this African. It didn't
Yeah.
feel South American,
I
even though
see.
it's Panther. I don't.
Um,
Um, but this is like a theme that comes up, and I want to get to this maybe after I finish my story. Is that many different ancestral streams can come to us, not just our ancestors, but like there's the universal isness again to the whole thing. So that morning I woke up and I was like, okay, I'm dedicated. Like if this experience is gonna happen, and I'm like, and they come to me and like I'm gonna act on it. And so I sat and I researched and I just was like, what happened or what is happening? And so I just followed the threads of inspiration. And then it led me to, which I didn't know, it led me to realizing that, yeah, that the Mormons, original Mormons, right there in the Salt Lake Valley, um, mandated genocide of those living, of the indigenous living in that valley.
the
And
Utes, the Ute.
it's not technically the Utes. That wasn't the Utes, but the Utes are like kind of like a canyon over. So it wasn't exactly my ancestors that were. It
I
ended
see.
up rippling out to affect like the Utes.
Right.
It was a different tribe, but they were neighboring.
I
And
see.
so there was this deep reconciliation within me because those Mormons that settled in the Salt Lake Valley, that was my ancestors. I was original pioneer. So whether they participated in the genocide or let it happen,
Mhm,
they were participants.
mhm.
And then simultaneously, there's a part of my lineage that is the native.
Yeah.
So we've got both,
Yeah.
happening. But I never knew that. And I sent it to my brother, my dad, my parents, and was like, did you know this happened? And they're like, no, like it's just,
Yeah, the Mormons have been hiding this for a long time, obviously. But
yeah.
this is a great lesson because, the Canadians killed the indigenous and the British killed the indigenous and the Spanish killed the indigenous and the Australians killed the indigenous. So let's learn this lesson because
Yes.
yeah. And so then your story is perfect. And then I think you probably want to bring in the story. Is it your grandmother who was uh tribal, right? Or your grandmother who was Ute? Your
No, it's the great grandfather. I think you're thinking of the grandmother because last time we had a call, you heard a call from my grandmother who's white, and but I have a strong Celtic lineage too, and so there's,
oh.
some energy there. We all,
Mm.
from different streams and stuff, but you had tuned into that at one of her yearnings at death was like to heal like all that had kind of like happened. So I think that that's maybe what you're
I
tapping
thought,
into.
wasn't one of your female ancestors that actually ended up marrying the Mormons because the indigenous were killed or something like that? Wasn't that in your?
No, it was a great grandfather that was the Ute, and then he got with my German great grandmother.
That's the story you told me. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
that German great grandmother was a bit of a shaman, would you say a bit of, or
I don't know. Like, I mean, she's definitely can't be controlled. Like there was a ferocity to her.
powerful,
Um,
powerful German?
Yeah, out in the middle of nowhere, like on an Indian reservation by herself with a big family, like it's pretty powerful in that sense. But Yeah.
and married indigenous then,
Well, it was an affair, so there was
which is even more colorful. Yeah,
yeah, there's a lot of color.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but the thing that was interesting in the finding out of the genocide piece was then I was like, okay, well then how do I work with this ancestor that's alone?
Yeah.
And so I painted, I'll maybe send you the images, but I painted his pain. Like I painted
Wow.
like his experience. And then I painted like the elementals experience because they're affected, obviously. Like how like the sun felt by like having to witness this, by like what the
Uh-huh.
land felt by having to witness this. And that was what came through to do to help
Oh.
like mend and start to repair at least that energetic piece. So
To feel all the pain, to feel the
yeah,
pain from the perspective of the grandfather, from the perspective of the land, from the son, and
yes.
then eventually maybe to feel the pain as it felt like to the Mormons. Oh my God. Like,
Yeah.
have they felt the pain yet? Uh,
Well, and my mom did. I sent her the stuff, and she'll probably listen to this because she loves our talks particularly. But she really went through it. Like, I mean,
yeah,
to
yeah,
actually reconcile and like take responsibility is like, oh, and you can see that like at least particularly in the Salt Lake Valley, it's one of the most polluted places on the planet. Like,
uh,
it's actually as the air quality is as bad as like as China.
oh,
And
really?
so, yes.
Oh,
And there's something, and it had some of the most potent resources. It had like one of the highest copper deposits, highest coal deposits. Like the resources were just incredible, and those have been extracted. And so there, I do see this like manifestation in the land of just kind of
yeah.
this like
And
the repercussions of what happened.
that is a key point here to really be made emphatically is the ability of the land to be centripetal and therefore to sort the pollution is precisely related to if there's a slip knot of pain in the land, then of course there's going to be clouds of pollution and no rain. In fact, there's a direct relationship between clouds of pollution and no rain because the land cannot get centripetal until the memory, I mean the magnetism, is sorted.
Really.
Very
So
profound.
that will actually, so that's a part. It's not just like, oh, there's pollution. It's
No,
like
no,
it actually can't
that's right.
self purify.
The clouds of pollution are, which is why, it's a little bit polluted and now a great Tibetan saint dies and suddenly there's rainbows. Well, what's the physics
Mm,
here? It's his aura added centripetal force. So when massive auras can get centripetal, the land can be healed. Absolutely. That's the whole physics of peacemaking, actually. That, village A is not going to make war on village B if you get the magnetic lines connected, because then the rose is conductive to the feeling, and therefore village A can't hate village B. It's the basic physics 101 of peaceuniversity.net. The whole story is there.
So can you speak a little bit to that? So like for this example, we're like using this as an example, but what would you do to like bring peace to like this place, for instance?
Yeah, thanks for asking the hard question. No,
Yeah, just a little question, just a quick question for you.
thanks for asking the right question. No, well, at peaceuniversity.net, let me just the short summary. So Phil Callahan, who was my teacher, proved that when he went down the Amazon, he always could tell in advance whether the next tribe were headhunters or whether they were friendly by whether or not magnetism could pass through the soil. Very simple, permissivity. So if magnetic lines are alive, the next village is going to be friendly. If the magnetic lines are dead. And so then he went to Yugoslavia, Vukovar, Israel, and Ireland, literally, and proved that when the magnetic lines break, war breaks out. And if you fix the magnetic line, peace breaks out. It's very simple because that is permission to touch. And so then our friend Marty Kane, for example, they went to Vukovar and they confirmed, oh, yes, when the war broke out, the underground water went, I'm out of here, man. They didn't want to
Yeah.
touch. No, the underground water is the blood of the earth. So of course it goes away if there's hate. So they went there and they did a labyrinth and feathers and rituals and the women and suddenly here comes the underground water.
Mm.
So peacemaking is that implosion, literally. And so the idea was, if you can get the magnetic lines restored to looking like a rose, and every time you build a highway that cuts the magnetic line across a continent, you're more likely to have war, literally, because the rose ain't working and it can't get centripetal, and that's the land.
Right. That's interesting. And so even so what are some of the ways, I mean, we can do
Yeah,
this peacemaking is part of it's the feeling. We've
yeah,
talked about but this
yeah.
is kind of like back to episode 1. It's like
Well,
the really feeling of the place and the
yes,
pain.
and make a magnetic map of the major sacred magnetic family lines of that land that's all polluted now. And remember the tribes and the tribal pain right on the magnetic map, and fix the places where the magnetic lines got cut, and then do some labyrinths and stone circles and some rituals, and that'll bring the rain, and that'll bring the clarity of the air, because the air is going to clarify when the charge implodes, for sure.
Right. Right. Wow.
So
Oh
yeah,
my gosh.
you could go up there, you could take the kids from the school and have them go out and cry where the ancestors felt that pain, actually, and that would bring the rain for sure, and that would clear.
So to feel it. So
Yeah.
they're supposed to feel it.
Oh yeah, you gotta feel it. They're not allowed to sing the song "I Haven't Got Time for the Pain." That's not allowed.
Right. Right.
So yeah,
And
because essentially that's the physics of all healing, in a sense, obviously, is because what happens is at the time of maximum pain, consciousness becomes disconnected, and that disconnect is, physics of autism. It's always about the disconnect at the moment of pain. So anytime there's a discontinuity of memory, that's the site that needs attention. Yeah.
yeah.
So then back to your personal story, then did you feel you made progress then? So you did that wonderful work of painting your grandfather's pain and the land's pain.
Yeah.
Love to see those paintings. Ooh, that sounds nice.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was powerful. Like I was just, a vessel, for all of it to come to pass. And then I actually went back 2 weeks ago in the middle, like to Salt Lake. And I think I was on the other side of it, feeling the white Mormon pain. And just like the yeah, I cried a lot. Just like for the kids and for like the people that are like so blind to like even the pollution, like is the physical manifestation of the
Yeah.
distortion. And it's like they can't even see that. And like I just it was crazy. So just doing my best to feel.
Yeah. And every time you sort a memory, the actual process in physics is called charge collapse. So what happens is that distribution of charge always is enabled by charge collapse, which essentially is make a rose, very simple, make a fractal. And when the fractality is restored, charge collapses again, and then self-sorting begins. It's that simple. So charge collapse is literally the cause of consciousness and gravity for that reason, because that implosion goes to the Planck threshold and then propagates into the longitudinal array, and that theshareablewave.com becomes the collective unconscious. So enabling charge collapse is to feel the pain. That's right. And then that enables circulation, and that enables the sorting process. That's the clear physics. But your example is so beautiful. And I must say, I can't help but think about how many millions and perhaps billions of indigenous people in South America died after the Spaniards arrived. And it's true in so many cultures, but just to begin to sort that is, and yet interesting. And the point we've made in all of our ET history films is that the ETs, the first people they need, they abduct, they talk to, they communicate with, in every case, is the lucid dreamers. So precisely the physics of what enables lucid dreams, which is obviously this densification of the aura to propagate coherently longitudinally, which is how you lucid dream and remote view and get clairvoyant, the physics of God, as it were, is precisely what makes the DNA of your children valuable. What you would call having a soul is a very specific electrical engineering centripetal force. And we remember, in the whole 10,000 humanoid species in this galactic sector, the trade of value, the highest value of everything they trade is DNA that works. Hint, who knows how to get a soul? You define origin of culture. So when you were connecting with that ancestral memory, that stream, that is precisely what I would call getting a soul. That's a beautiful thing. And
And so as part of getting the soul or continuing to cultivate the aura feeling.
yeah, it's just like Gurdjieff said, if you can't put feeling in your baby finger with your attention and make it begin to tingle, you ain't ready to do a bliss dance because your attention is not centripetal enough. He called that putting feeling. What that meant was literally installing charged circulation in such a way that it could then embed and propagate into a larger array, the lucid dream, the collective unconscious, what Gurdjieff called the Kesjan body, actually, which we now know is longitudinal coherence, the same thing the Tibetans call the rainbow light body. So the onset of that form of coherence, I think we could have measured that after you had your initiation experience, actually, in your brainwave, et cetera, when your clairvoyance switched on. I think that's a valuable story, Bridget. Congratulations for being conscious of that moment. I'm only a little
There was no way I couldn't be conscious of that moment. It was so intense. But these other moments, I will say that this last moment, that experience I had with these other ancestors and everything that's converged from this part of the story is coming from pure intention. Like, because there's this like deeper cultivation, I feel like, in my subconscious through our conversations of like, it's the pure intention, like for the highest good. And I feel like that has made that availability. And I'd be curious to hear what you feel about kind of, because we said that, okay, certain lines with certain genetics are accessible. And at the same time, it's like, I have had access to like other ancestral streams and stuff. So why do you think that that's being made accessible? Like, why wouldn't they be racially exclusive or, whatever, genetically exclusive? Like why is that being made available so that like others can access that?
I mean, at one level, I think it's pretty simple. There are very few people able and ready to do that kind of work. And there's so many ancestral lines that need that healing. Oh my God. So that when you in a sense, initially you're serving your local rose, but later you're serving a much bigger rose. And the intent to serve grows the size of that rose. It's what you call pure intention, that implosion. It's a beautiful story. And it's obvious because this planet desperately needs those lessons, the connection between the physics, between the actual meaning of environmental service. I mean, if ever there's an example of serving your environment, this is Ecology 101. Hello. Why is that valley polluted? Part of the problem is in memory.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's fascinating, even the replay of that and the morphogenetics that's happening right now. So just south of where I am, you heard about the Ohio spill?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So the water, the polluted water is being delivered south of where I live. It's going to be injected deep into the earth, and it's right next to the battle site. Like I looked on the map, it actually ends up being right next to the battle site of I'm not sure which war it was. It could have been, I don't know my history too well down here, but it's one of the wars. It might be
War of 1812, Mexican American.
Yeah, it might be the Mexican American Civil War. I'm not sure which one it is. But there's a battle right there, like where it's going to be injected. And I just was like, like kind of like watching the replay of those things happening is fascinating as well.
Poison into the array, exactly. So to heal this poison, we need massive centripetal force, which is massive collective consciousness and lucid dreaming to create that implosion, to sort that. That's very interesting that you noticed that. Yeah, Valerie talks about that Ohio story every day. She feels that so intensely as well, that, the density of that pollution and that. Yeah, and what is going to sort that water? The sorting process, and water's built on implosion. That's what hydrogen is about, which is perfectly shareable wave, that memory. So, wherever that poison goes means there's a big job going to need to be done for sure. It's like a vaccine. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's yep. Well, it's down the street, so I'll be working on that one next.
Yeah, maybe let's call that our next conversation.
Yeah.
Well, Uh, I would really like to congratulate you for your being conscious of these things and you know of the relationship to ancestor memory and how we could use your experience to heal ancestral memories of so many kinds that you go back there and you find the pain. You know, it reminds me of family constellation therapy. Like,
I did that for 2 years.
yeah,
That's why it's accessible in me, is because 'cause
yeah,
I'm like, "Well, yeah, this is what you do," you know,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
and you realize too, I think a lot of empaths, then the ones, and the lucid dreamers, the ones that could actually, that are meant to, available to do these things, they're scared of it because they're like, I'm going to be consumed by it.
yeah.
And that's one of the reasons in the beginning, when I was in my early 20s, I was like, I don't even want to touch this because I'm going to be consumed by it. But family constellation taught me you can just move into the energy, you can move out of the energy. And so I think that, but that's totally what it is.
Yeah, it's like, well, there was this great pain experience, and now let's feel the pain from the mother. Now let's feel the pain from the father. Now let's feel
Yeah.
the pain from, and that's called consumed perspective, and that's how
Yes.
Shakespearean theater worked. You had the symmetry of everyone's in a cube octa. It's literally phase conjugation, and that consumed perspective at the end of the play, everybody cries for everybody and realizes we're one. So at the end of
Mm.
this play, the
Is
place.
that what that is? Wow. I didn't think about it that way. That's
The
so
reason
powerful.
Shakespearean theater is a cube octa, and they sequence the emotional experience of everyone in the play until suddenly at the end of the play, you realize you're feeling for everyone at once. You phase conjugated, implode, consume perspective in the octacube called Shakespearean theater. And John Dee, that's his story, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's
So
called
how
in Shakespeare, they call that alchemy.
mm. So how far does that go? Cuz like I'm just kind of, these experiences just pop up, like the next thing for me to feel or the next thing for me to do just kind of like pops up.
Mhm.
But I think that when people have these feelings, like Valerie with the Ohio thing, we can heal from a distance. I was in Texas working with Utah. So people can heal at a distance then to these like sites or these things that they might feel more, connected to.
Right. And that, you know, we've made several recent films on the physics of healing at a distance. Shortly, in summary, you know, if the sender and receiver are both on a magnetic line or a cross point, that
Mm,
increases the connection. If it's sunrise or sunset, that increases the connection. If there's a psychotronic witness, a high res photo from sender to receiver, the same physics that the frequency signature of send point and receive point of a Stargate has to be precise. So setting up those similitudes between the send and receive point, the fact that that DNA of that place is in your blood, so you were enabled to do that communication. Remember, in conventional physics, they say entanglement creates action at a distance through Einstein-Rosen-bridge wormhole. What they mean is entanglement perfected is named phase conjugation, which is how you connect a longitudinal array, which is a much deeper understanding, at which point Einstein would not have had to describe action at a distance as spooky, because it is not. We understand the physics very well, actually, how the array, because there's an increasing number of faster than light harmonics times Dolan ratio times C, which connect array point A and array point B. And if you need your entanglement point to reach 1,000 light years the other way, you might need the biggest Stargate in the galaxy, the Trapezium in Orion, but the physics is the same. It's the
mhm.
number of harmonics that implode, converge, impedance match, and couple in the longitudinal array. So we can understand stargates, we can understand healing ancestors. It's about that connectivity, that connection. And as you say, ultimately, physics of compassion to feel that pain.
Now, one other question I have that's interesting to that last experience is right now that new house that we're on, like it has the ley lines, like there's oak groves, like
Nice.
there's
That's
there's some real good energy here.
that's
I'm feeling
druidic,
really good about that.
druid oaks.
Yes, yeah. Oh, it's just wonderful. But the place where I had that experience of that ancestral stream coming to me, I was not in those situations. I was like, there's a smart meter on the other side of like where I was sleeping. I don't know that there were magnetic lines. It like was in kind of denser electromagnetics, and it still came through.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, like, what the physics of that would be, because I'm like, most of the other times, yes, it's when I'm on these magnetic lines and stuff. But is there a point where it's overrode? Like it's like
Oh, I'm
so
sure.
needed or something,
Yeah,
or
yeah, well, I would
how
think.
could that have happened?
Mhm. But you have noticed that where you are now, your dreams are more fluid and colorful, or, when the trees are nearby? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and probably when you're not in such an ideal place, the pain, it might be a little harder to deal with, perhaps, I would think as well. Uh,
That's interesting.
yeah, that if you're surrounded with the more electrosmog you're surrounded with, the more will it takes to deal with the pain, I would just guess.
I definitely, yeah, that's definitely my experience.
Like there's been a speculation that if you're under an aluminum roof, it's harder to lucid dream. Well, the physics is your auras, plasma can't propagate through as easily. In a Swiss house, everything's organic, and there's literally a hole in the roof for grandma to go through when she dies, and she knows how to steer from there. It's the whole family knows, Whereas in an aluminum roof in a electrosmog city, grandma gets pretty dizzy when she dies.
Right. So you can. So it's
That's right.
like you could have
That's
an
right.
experience, but actually integrating it, feeling it, like having, and that was definitely the case. Like I was like in a not in a good place for
Yeah.
like a week, like
Yeah.
as I was working on all of this.
Yeah,
Um,
you had the will, and so you push through, and that's wonderful. But that's why we always say, well, don't try to have a sustained bliss experience in a metal building full of electrosmog, because you're going to implode pollution, basically, and
right.
all the ancestors would look for. But on the other hand, which we say the saying is sometimes you walk on water, sometimes you take a bridge. When you have to walk on water, you can do it, but
Right. But like it'll happen if it's meant to, but it can be easier. And so
much
maybe
more.
that's an invitation to that piece where it's like the capacity. Like I think a lot of people don't, go into this because it's like I don't have the capacity to do it. And maybe part of the capacity is I'm talking nervous system capacity, but I think it like ties in probably to the science,
Yeah,
um, is having the environmental
that's
support
right.
capacity to have those experiences.
So the evolved person would make a magnetic map of their bed, their room, their house, and their yard, and they would be very conscious of where they want to start their lucid dreams because they will get leverage, what Castaneda called the place of power. And when Korotkov followed the Kogi to where they make ancestor phone calls and measured the fractality of the air, it's pretty good proof, that charge distribution efficiency defines ancestral lines. It's clear. But the fact that you were able to do it in a tough place means, if you can do it there, you can do it anywhere.
Which is like great, but also like, by the way, you don't have to, and maybe
Yeah,
find a place that's better.
right. And the
Yeah.
fact that you have the baraka to teach this is a good thing, dear. So are you going to write about this and share your pictures a little bit or something?
I did in an email, but maybe I'll like put it up on my website so you can link it so that people
I
can
could,
see
yeah,
it or something.
if I could put a few things in the film notes here, that those pictures.
Yeah, absolutely. Because those pictures, like, there's something I
Yeah,
don't, I'm not connected to them. It's just they were coming through me, and I do feel like they're. I showed them to my mentor, and she was like, "Those have a very similar energy, and even I don't know way of it coming through that were similar to like other genocide pictures that she's seen before. So there's a universality, like even I think to this grieving and to this feeling experience.
yeah. I think of the Jungian therapist who was teaching us art therapy as part of the Gurdjieff school. The flashbacks are coming to me now. I didn't
And what
understand.
did they do? What did they
Well,
do?
we were studying the nine, Enneagram, Gurdjieff, sacred gymnastic, and we had a Jungian therapist teaching us art therapy, actually. And you can see that to access the deep currents, and I understood none of this at that point, but it really, it does make sense and so what Gurdjieff called the Kesjan body and the rainbow light body was a very good introduction to this. And at that time, there was no science, really.
Hmm.
We didn't
Yeah,
even know the Enneagram was plasma physics of the nine. It's strictly plasma physics. It's beautiful.
yeah. Well, it makes sense.
Yeah.
There's a lot there.
Well,
And I can feel it's funny when I am talking to you, I do feel that you're on that line. Like there too, like there's more accessible because you're on that line in these conversations.
yeah,
Like
it's a
I think that
cathar
that is a
line.
part of it.
Yeah. And it's It's great that you felt the lines where you are, and yet you were in Sedona. So you have a good, and you had so much connection to the Utah sacred lines. So
Yeah.
eventually you can connect them to what that means, even, intercontinentally, and healing of continents. And because humanity is going to need to learn their place in a very big galactic world very soon. And
Yeah.
that kind of shamanism in our luciddreamteam.com lucid dreaming group, that's what they're dealing with too. If there are collective lucid dreaming groups that can deal with these issues as a group.
So yeah, how are they supposed to deal with it? Like waking, because we were talking about like the waking morning or feeling, and then how is it done differently, or is it similar in lucid dreaming? And like, why is that? How is that different or better? Or
Well, electrically, one would have to hypothesize that in the dream state, the brainwave pattern is much more centripetal. For example, a few people, I've even measured a couple, can lucid dream and make alpha with their eyes open. It's fabulous. But when you find people that make alpha in their brainwaves with their eyes open, it ain't common. And that alpha, remember, the alpha cascade is the Schumann cascade, is the phase conjugate pump wave of infrasound. It's the centripetal that makes all of our devices, the aerified, plasma, fire, and quantified. That's the same infrasound. So when you got that going in your brainwaves, you have a lot more leverage. So going to do it in the dream spell obviously gives you more leverage, unless your brainwaves are that coherent. And I think the ancient shaman, when they went into these trance states, they were probably making alpha with their eyes open, but that isn't something that the beginners can do. That's my guess. Yeah.
So it's actually like a easier place to start in lucid dreaming than it would be in consciously awake.
That's right. If learning to do it in the dream state, you have a lot more motility in the
Right.
plasma array, actually, until, and even when you used to see those Aboriginal women, they were sitting there and you'd think they were like just sleeping. But in fact, they were doing the dream spell and fixing things down their family song line, 100 kilometers down the track. They were fixing something. They were literally moving the magnetic lines. And that was an Aboriginal skill. And that's because that
Right.
magnetic line was a family pet.
Yeah. And earlier you asked me the question between vivid dreaming and lucid dreaming. I'm gonna just throw the question back to you because I'm like, well, it's not lucid. I mean, it's like I see it as like different octaves or different, gradients of like, okay, it's more vivid or it's more like bright, or like some of my friends call it higher astral. I don't think that that's like a proper term, but it's like one of those things where it's more vibrant. So it's kind of like on the way to lucidity, possibly. Do you know how those different levels work?
Well, there's been a lot of definitions of lucid dreaming up to the point of describing astral travel and remote viewing as an
Yeah.
extension of. And we know that this golden ratio cascade in, for example, a binaural beat of sound can trigger remote viewing in this astral travel. So I think one of the original descriptions of dream lucidity was you could go somewhere and come back with testable memory retrieval. You went somewhere and you saw something, it was real, or you went somewhere and you met someone and it was real, and came back, it was testable, to the point where John Charles Moyen, his lucid dream brainwave harmonics, he went to the beach and came back with sand between his toes, and there were witnesses. It was bilocation. So good lucid dreaming turns into bilocation, and that's measurable. Ain't that cool? And we measured it.
That's so high level. That's such high level stuff.
And the difference is literally only density. I mean, specifically, remember when they said, if you want a lucid dream, look at your hand in the dream. Well, the reason you look at your hand in the dream is because the map of your hand nerves on the homunculus inside your head is the biggest map. In other words, if you map how much of your brain is occupied by your wires to your hand, it's huge. So when you look at your hand in your dream, what's happening is the do loop is getting denser quickly. In other words, compression. And that makes your aura more dense. And that centripetal force is precisely what radiates into the longitudinal array by imploding charge collapse through Planck, the definition of consciousness and gravity, actually. So literally, the more dense your aura gets, the more leverage you get on the bigger array. And so lucidity would electrically be defined as how dense your aura got, and therefore how much leverage you got to move charge at a distance, quite literally. So lucid dreaming starts with simple little exercises, and there's dozens of books, and they're good, but eventually it turns into a true interstellar psychokinesis, and it's real. It's not a mystery.
Yeah. I'm think that reminds me back to like the Toltec thing that we were talking about earlier. One of their main lucid dreaming practices is to integrate and feel the shadow, like of your own like life, of your own negative patterns like within yourself. And it's like that correlates to dreaming, like people wouldn't think necessarily. And it's like, yeah, this is like one of the main ways is to do that. And then other ways to charge like the aura. So utilizing the sun, utilizing the moon, and then really integrating the shadow. Those were like the main methods.
Interesting. Yeah, because I often say in the first X number of months after my first intense Kundalini, I cried for days, months, weeks at a time. I was crying. I don't even think I was aware of why I was crying, but I was tears of bliss, tears of pain. I don't know what it was tears of, but I was crying a lot. And later I realized, you had to sort every emotion which was not shareable. It was not sorted into pure principle. And once you see the perspective consumed of pure principle of all of your pain, then suddenly you can see through it all, quite literally through charge collapse.
Wow. Wild.
Anyway, well, thank you. I admire your skills here, and I think your sensitivity to this can help a lot of people to sort their ancestral memory. And maybe we should invite people who want to share that. And eventually we come back and we do a little fractalu.com together.
Yeah.
But if you would share a couple of those pictures, that'd be fun to put in here. And
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely will. It felt like they were like meant to be shared to evoke like that movement of again like the emotion and the energy. And like for me, I like don't think of these things as skills. I just think of it as actually like the courage to feel.
yeah, and literally we believe that at the moment that you felt that pain, those dead ancestors literally increased their ability to be awake. Literally, the moment you felt that pain, those ancestors came more awake. The reason the ancestors rise from the dead at the resurrection is because plasma compression enables charge distribution. That's what it is. That's what the resurrection is.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this is great. Thanks again for the continuity of our conversation is creating like these connections like through everything. So I really have to hand it to you and thank you for your contribution.
Maybe we could set a little imagination vision for the next episode having to do with, well, which ET ancestors and the extraterrestrial component here, and every tribe knew which ET ancestors was, and is there an even bigger picture to heal?
Definitely. I think for some reason in my consciousness, like it's going very earthbound because I could go very galactic and it's like stay here. Like this is going to be what's needed.
Yeah,
Um
grounded.
and I appreciate that invitation to re-enter into that world.
Yeah. So let's just see which ancestral lines are asking for attention now. Maybe we set our lucid dream intent and do
Yeah,
that
and
together.
see what's up next.
It's been wonderful. Thank you, Bridget,
Yeah.
as always.
Yeah.
Thank you for your twinkle and your presence, and it's been a joy.
Same to you. Same to you. Thank you so much, Dan. Really appreciate it.
It's all done with mirrors. Thank you. Bye, Bridget. It's been
Bye-bye.
fabulous. Thank you. Bye.